Volume 5 C40. 2 weeks, and still the city had not fallen. 2 weeks, and only dispatches had come her way. 2 weeks, and order was still not restored. Pull some of the soldiers back from the wall and reinforce the capital, Kalka said with some reluctance. Remedios looked at her with alarm and began to struggle in her bed. My queen. The demi-humans might invade. Her deep and staring eyes did not have the desired effect on the queen. They haven't been united in over 100 years. As long as that remains the case, we don't need to reduce the numbers for long, just enough to take back the capital. They lack discipline, unity, and order. As long as nobody gives them that, we can quickly right the situation here and then. Kalka frowned. I believe some of the penalties involved with rioting can be modified. If they like fighting so much, let them serve at the wall. Every peasant caught with weapons or wounds from fighting will be sent to the northeast to the border with the Abelian Hills. That should increase our numbers more than we need. Remedios relaxed. She ceased trying to sit back up. My queen, she grunted a little and inched herself up on her pillow. It was thickly stuffed with goose down, the blankets were linen and the mattress thickly stuffed with cotton. It was the finest place to rest that the queen could have given her. Yet the restored paladin was constantly agitating to rise and train to regain her old strength. And we're going to the capital, my brother and I both. Kalka informed her paladin, and Remedios tried to rise again. Then I need to go too, Remedios insisted, only for Kalka to lay a hand on her chest and push her back down by force. No, Remedios. No. You are not fit to fight, or to protect me, or for anything right now but breathing and getting better. Kalka's eyes shimmered a bit and she choked a little as she spoke. Just be patient, you'll be up and about again before you know it. Remedios struggled against a hand that was not much stronger than a young child. I should be with my queen. Not here. Damn it. Damn the dragon, damn the bitch, damn the demi-humans and their sympathizers. This is all their fault. I was just doing my duty and what did I get for it? Damn them all. She cursed and looked away from her queen and back up toward the ceiling. Yes, your majesty. Remedios acknowledged, and Kalka slowly stood up. The queen was quiet for a moment, then another moment, and then another, until Remedios finally slightly turned her head to face her mistress and asked, My queen, is there more? Kalka nodded. She remained mute and folded her hands in front of her waist. Her lips twitched and moved as if she was about to speak, but could not get out the words. Finally, she took a long slow breath and said, I have been a fool. I was the queen because Caspon didn't really want the throne, and because he thought I would be better fit for it than he or our brothers. I was the queen because I was loved, and I loved our people. I was driven by my ideals, my dreams of a kingdom where nobody cried, where everyone was happy, and now look. She gritted her teeth and sucked air audibly between them. My capital falls to a rioting mob, the south withholds taxes, elven slaves rise in rebellion, and even my paladins no longer trust in my justice. I must own my part in all these things. I am the queen, therefore the gold coin stops in my palm. Kalka raised her hand and closed all but her pointer finger into a fist, and leveled the remaining finger at Remedios. But you, my brother, your sister, also have a hand in all of this. I was handled. I put too much faith in all of you. Even though you believed in my ideals, you corrupted them at your whims. Kellet and Caspon's tolerance of the slave trade in the south. I was assured slaves are too expensive to treat poorly and that they would live lives that made them grateful to be here rather than in the theocracy. But if that were so, they wouldn't be slaughtering my people and rising in revolt. You corrupted my laws to convict whoever you wanted. You won your trials, but at the cost of having nobody trust them anymore. You executing the Huntress of the Wildlands led directly to the assault on the wall by the very dragon she saved. Making things worse, her family, one of the 9 colors, has abandoned us. He and his wife sent formal letters of resignation and castigated us over what happened to their daughter. I can't even apologize because they've disappeared. Remedios's eyes opened in alarm. My queen, I was only trying to. Kalka would have none of it. Shut up. The queen commanded. Your queen speaks. Kalka shook her head. I put too much faith in people who lacked it themselves. How can I expect people to press my ideals if they won't follow them? If my ideals can't work without destroying them entirely, they don't work at all. When all is said done, you will answer for what you've done. Perhaps if I had known more, the dragon might have become an ally, our northern border could have been easily secured. Perhaps the huntress was right. Perhaps if we treated the demi-humans with some kindness, we would not always be enemies. Perhaps if I had seen the condition of the elves, I could have ended their suffering. But I knew nothing, trusted everyone, and now, here we are. The rant ran out of steam, and for a moment the weary queen's shoulders slumped and her accusing hand fell away from where it pointed. Rest, Remedios, you will get the chance to work my will again, but when you do, you will not be doing so as the commander of the Paladin Order. And you will follow my orders, or you will wish you had. The queen's furious tears of anger never left her eyes, as if those two had been drained of energy. Remedios could only lie there open-mouthed and in disbelief as her beloved leader spun on her heel and left the paladin to lie impotent in bed, barely able to believe, or even process, what had just happened. Queen Kalka's carriage arrived with pomp and ceremony at the siege of Hobans. Trumpets, drums, and cheers came from her soldiers, her banners on full display. The mob ruler of the capital was so audibly alarmed by her coming that Kalka could hear their cries of consternation before she even set foot on the ground when her carriage stopped. She emerged into the crisp air of late summer that promised a cool and gentle autumn ahead. Her eyes followed the activity of the camp around her. A command tent sat a few feet away, and when her first foot hit the ground, Gotza was already in front of her and down on one knee. His big round head bowed before her, one hand on the hilt of his sword and his other closed into a fist over his heart. His armor had many dents and scuffs, and had obviously been repaired a few times. "My queen," he said in a gruff, confident voice, "welcome home." Kalka had to smile a little bit at that despite the grim situation. "I'm not exactly home yet, am I, Commander?" "Nearly, my queen. Nearly. We've almost breached the walls in several places, and we've had some successful assaults. We've also repelled several attempts to sally out here and stop us directly." He laughed a brutish laugh. "They won't try that again." Kalka tried not to think of the cost of life and blood that lay behind his laughter, and instead turned her eyes up toward the walls. "Do I have any supporters left inside?" "We asked about that, Majesty," Gotza said, and his lips went tight and drawn across his face. "We did lose some people as prisoners when we were pushed back from the walls, and we believe that some of the common bureaucrats and a few nobles may still be alive. They've hinted about it to us, but there is nothing certain." "Hinted?" Queen Kalka emphasized the word. "Exactly what do you mean?" "We asked about it at our first parley," Gotza explained, some of the vigor gone from his voice. "They said, it would be a shame if your arrows found the wrong marks. I take that to mean that they were threatening to use hostages as shields against our arrows. So, per your Majesty's policy, we prioritized the lives of the hostages and have used no archery unless we confirmed that there were no innocents there who could be harmed." "That must have made fighting difficult," Queen Kalka remarked in a passive voice of regret. Her eyes went down. "How many soldiers died for that policy, I wonder?" "Paladins and knights are supposed to protect the innocent, your Majesty. Nobody has complained, but..." He swallowed. "I would be lying if I said it didn't make fighting harder. Many times we could have suppressed their archers, but did not because we couldn't confirm that no hostages were present. That is my fault too." Queen Kalka straightened up. Her blue eyes became like steel. "I'm changing that policy. I won't sacrifice the loyal this way. I won't hobble my army or my administration any longer. If they use hostages, they use them, and we will save whom we can. It's better than not saving anyone." "As my queen wills it," Commander Gotza answered with confidence. Just like that, Kalka thought with dismay, he abandons my ideals. No fighting, no argument, no debate. Just, the queens will be done. Did anyone truly believe in them? Or was I really all alone in trying to make them real? In that moment, a profound sense of loss hit the Holy Queen. Her heart broke in her breast, and it was all she could do not to weep openly as if she were watching a precious child of her own body die in her own arms. A part of herself was dead, and nothing could bring it back. Volume 5 C41. Kellet and Gustav rode side by side at the head of the army. The pace of the horses was steady and strong, their hooves stomping the hard-packed earthen highways while their heavy infantry made the march behind the long lines of cavalry. The taxes seized from many of the noble houses were only begrudgingly given up, and far behind the army came the wagon trains of collected coins, grain, and other vital goods intended for resale to support the throne. At least no word had come of overt hostility, but the reality of the situation was not lost on Gustav or Kellet. Where once the peasants might have openly praised the passing paladins and knights of their beloved queen, They now just quietly kept their young and comely women out of sight, and now the peasants openly backed away or simply glared at the passing royal army. We seem to be less popular than we used to be. Gustav made the neutral observation while only looking at Kellett out of the corner of his eye. Kellett in her magic robes made for a compelling and noble sight. Her long brown hair, the sharp features on her face, along with her steady eyes could unnerve others with a glance, and one could all but feel the magic from her. The only immediate response to his statement was that she tightened her grip on the reins of her white horse, and glared down at those who glared back at her in turn until they looked away and went sullenly back to work in whatever field they were in, raising and striking their hoes into the earth, a routine older than the kingdom itself. Finally she spoke to him. "We can fix this. We just need to purge the corruption out of the kingdom and do what we can to restore the trust of the people. It may take time, but it can be done, Commander." Gustav kept his eye on her while still watching the road. "Will you be including yourself in that purge? How about me? Your sister?" Kellett glanced over to Gustav. "What do you mean?" she asked innocently, her eyes completely removed from the road. Then Gustav could not look at her further while he spoke. "Never mind," he muttered. "No. Not never mind, Commander. Speak," she hissed the order through gritted teeth. "You remember what started all of this? It was the trial of the Huntress. Yes, there were a lot of rumors, stories, and corruption events before. But that was the brick that broke the donkey's back. The story of the Huntress of the Wildlands was probably exaggerated, but with her public trial, her reputation went all over the place, and everybody knew it was a sham. I know it was a sham. And I know my former commander made it that way." He whispered the accusation at Kellett, who sat mute on her horse. "The Mad Archer's daughter, the child of one famous paladin and one of the colors, first sent to die, then given a show trial after a record of survival and success where most just disappeared never to be seen again? What was your idiot sister thinking?" Gustav hissed back at her, his anger palpable. He yanked his head toward her and glared at her as she had glared at peasants before. Kellett remained mute. Gustav, however, did not. He hissed his complaint and let out his fury with every word. "I was the judge at that trial. I saw Amadeus' face. I spoke with one of the whores who screwed her way through the jurors. There's no way I believe you didn't know what your sister was up to. She's too stupid to act on her own. She's just smart enough to know she needs other people to think for her, and to take credit for other people's work." Kellett finally slumped. The heat left her eyes. "You're right. I did know," she acknowledged. "I had a hand in. Not everything, but a lot. I was trying to keep Roble from harm. We used corruption against the corrupt. I never thought it would turn on us this way." "Fool." He snarled at his senior, and she did not retort. "Every ounce of blood here is on you. And me for going along with it. Maybe if I'd declared a mistrial due to corruption, maybe none of this would have happened. So, what happens when we're done?" Kellett shook her head. "Only the gods know that, and perhaps the Holy Queen." She was resigned in how she said it, and sluggish when she raised her hand to point ahead. "There it is, Hobens, and from the looks of it, the issue of who is in charge has yet to be settled." It was an understatement. Even from a distance the fires were obvious. Plumes of smoke rose from fires that couldn't be seen behind the great towering walls. More noteworthy, they rose from multiple points around the city, which in Gustav's experienced eyes meant heavy fighting in multiple positions. That can't be good. It took another half a day to reach the city with the bulk of the royal army, and no sooner than they reached the area that alarms went up from inside the city walls. Commander Gotza met the pair shortly after the noise of the city went up and the numbers of people on the walls began to increase. He bowed to the pair before they dismounted, but remained quiet while Gustav bellowed orders over his shoulder. "First bannermen, see to the main gate. Second, see to the western wall. Third, see to the eastern wall. Fourth, see to the northern wall. Establish reinforced positions by nightfall." Haru! 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 The paladins and knights on horse and foot alike raised their lances and banners as they cheered, and the nobles commanding each army began to move their units into position. The camp, as Gustav saw it, was in good order, ample space between tents to avoid mass targets, more tents than were needed in order to provide the illusion of greater numbers, and the onagers were well out of reach of easy reprisal from the walls. Various hulks of ruined rams sat at different intervals from the gate, but the fact that there were multiples indicated that the commander was acting with aggression. The soldiers who marched by were in good order, with clean if sometimes damaged armor, and even without looking he could see that Gott's armor had battle damage. Leading from the front, good. Gustav reflexively approved of the big bear of a man and descended from his horse to extend his hand. Gotze clasped it. "Sir, it's good to have you and your army here." He glanced up at the still-mounted Kellett. "And your magic, Lady Custodio," he added with a polite bow of his head. She returned the gesture. "At least things are in good order. But why hasn't the city fallen yet, Commander Gotze?" "Because the mob organized itself and has, much to our surprise, been steady in their resistance. We simply didn't have the numbers we needed." Gotze didn't wince at the use of his full name as a tiny rebuke. He knew quite well that he'd done all that could be done, though he straightened up a bit when he replied. "They'll fall with or without you, but we're also trying to minimize the destruction of the city. What's the point in taking it if all that means is that Her Majesty becomes Queen of the Ashes?" "Good point," Kellett answered with some chagrin, enough that she chose to dismount her horse and make a sort of apology. "I'm sure you've done all that you could have done under the circumstances. I didn't mean to sound so critical." He shrugged it off and gave her a friendly smile from behind his bushy brown beard. "Think nothing of it. Now that you're here, perhaps they'll surrender." Albedo watched from her window as a few hundred prisoners were dragged through the streets, judges, minor nobles of various houses which hadn't fled the city fast enough. Some public officials, guards, soldiers, watchmen, and others. Their clothes were tattered and torn, dirty, unwashed, and every one of them was worse for wear. Some were limping, all were bound together with ropes, chains, and wooden poles that ran alongside their heads. Worse, they were blindfolded. Most were sullen and silent as the mob hurled abuses at them. Others, however, were not quite broken. "Curse you all. Peasant trash. Don't you know who I am? I have connections all over the south. You trash eat the food we send you. You trash have your weapons because we pay for them. You dare do this to me? May the demi-humans feast on you all. We should have let them kill this whole worthless region." It did nothing to endear him to the crowd. But Albedo, watching as she was from the window, began to laugh. "Oh, this is marvelous. There were southern nobles here." Of course there were. This is Hobans, they would be close to the crown. Albedo's laughter was grim like the cat looming over the canary. She licked her lips as hungrily as one as well, watching as the captives were dragged to the towers and hauled up the stairs, stumbling, falling, bruising, cursing, and screaming when they were struck by hate-filled peasants driving them like cattle. "My lady, what will be happening to them up there?" Skana asked as she approached the window to stand beside her lady. Ilyana, for her part, still refused to come any closer to the noise of human hatred and rage, putting herself into the corner. But Skana, unable to restrain her curiosity, was drawn to the demoness in the window like a moth to a flame. Albedo looked down at the bright-eyed girl. "Painful deaths. The city will fall tomorrow, and when it does, we will not be here. I have no intention of engaging in combat with these worthless ants." "So where are we going?" Skana quipped as she watched the prisoners being positioned where they would be visible to the attacking army. "To the southern Holy Kingdom. It won't be long, just a few days, enough time to spread the word of the atrocities allowed to be visited on southern nobles in the north, the weakness of the Holy Queen. From there?" Albedo chortled with delight as if she heard a hilarious joke. "From there," she held her belly to hold back her laughter, "we will visit the wall again." Skana nodded. "My lady, your rewards, I cannot thank you enough for them, but can I kinda ask just one more small thing?" "You can always ask," Albedo emphasized and turned her attention from the screams that began on the wall. "My village, it's not a bad place. Sure, some of the people are dumb, stupid, bigoted, foul-smelling, sticks in the mud with no sense of fun whatsoever." Skana began listing off their flaws until Albedo cleared her throat. "The point, Skana?" Albedo demanded, and Skana blushed a little at the reproof. "But on the whole, they're all right. I mean, they don't deserve to die, is all. I know we can't always stop this kinda stuff, but if it isn't too much trouble, could I ask that the common folk not be made to suffer too badly? I mean, I'm one of them, and I'm useful, right, my lady?" Skana pointed out. Albedo gave that a moment of brief reflection. "True. But it won't be up to me, it will be up to the Queen of Frost." The answer was cold comfort to Skana, who returned to sit beside the quiet elf woman. "Have they gone mad?" Queen Kalka shouted as the prisoners on the wall began to scream. Peasants standing behind them began to beat the nobles, judges, and officials with heavy whips, clubs, and flails. Blood spattered about, bones snapped before the disbelieving army of the Holy Queen, but it was not lost on them, even in a state of dismay, that lethal injuries were avoided. The point was suffering. It was a point of no return. A message, a gauntlet thrown down before the royal house. Soldiers snarled and clenched their weapons as they recognized their comrades either by face or by status given their tattered remains of uniforms, and saw them crying out in agony for mercy that their captors were unwilling to grant to them. Commander Gotsahabin approached the Holy Queen and then stepped in front of her, putting his body between her and the hideous sight so that he obscured her view of the wall like a mountain. "You don't need to see this, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "Why? Why would they do this? How could they be so cruel?" Queen Kalka choked out as she listened to the voices of agony and pain continued to rise. Gotsa, unfortunately, had an answer. "This is the ugly side of war. This is a statement that there will be no quarter, no surrender. The defenders intend to fight to the death." Queen Kalka vigorously wiped the snot from her nose and tears of anger from her eyes. "Get out of the way, Commander. I should know what I'm dealing with, for better or for worse." "My queen," he started. "Now, Commander." "That is an order," Kalka said with the iron of royalty in her voice, and with some reluctance, the mountain of a man stepped aside. The bright blue eyes of the once beloved queen stared at the twisting faces and the sprays of blood. The whole event took minutes, but it felt like hours to the queen, and to those atop the wall who endured the revenge of those whose names and faces they never knew before that hour, felt like years. One by one, the torment ended, and some nameless peasant who meant nothing to anyone, gave a swift kick to one of the beaten, broken, bleeding captives, and sent him plummeting off of the wall before moving to the next prisoner. Thud after thud followed. The noise continued with such regularity that the falling bodies were like the sticks used to beat drums, and the noise was that of a warrior's march, until there were none left to kick off, and there were no captives left to torment or to kill. When it was done, and the silence stretched out like the inside of a grave, Kalka walked to the command tent where Kellet and Gustav sat speaking, trying to ignore the distant cries until they stopped. When she entered, they rose to their feet and prepared to kneel, but the ice-eyed queen shook her head and waved it away. "Forget it, I have only one order." Before they could ask for it, she gave it to them. "Tomorrow, when you attack, and you will attack, anyone found with a weapon is subject to immediate execution as a traitor. Anyone who does not immediately surrender, is subject to immediate execution as a traitor. Anyone found inside my palace or with plundered treasure, is subject to immediate execution as a traitor. Am I understood?" "Why, yes, my queen," they said at once, and then said nothing more when she wheeled about and left them behind. Volume 5 C42. Naya stared at Thalrin in disbelief. "You can't be serious." I am," Thalrin said with a grim face. His broad mouth beneath his thick round protruding porcine nose, was turned down at the corners in a frown. "The humans on the wall are especially nasty now, don't know where they got 'em, but they put some bodies on display. Bunch of different types. Guess they're warning us." Thalrin grunted. Naya stopped dead in her tracks. The dark dwarven supervisors were teaching some of the orcs how to build stone-paved roads, while the Spriggans were planting rows of trees to guide the path. From atop the hill where she now stood, she could see the edifices of buildings beginning to rise, and with her dragonid hearing and sense of smell, she could detect the growth and fast-paced activity of the first industrial metalworks of her kingdom. The demi-human tribes were still reticent about working together. She could see they tended to stick to their own groups. But the power of unity isn't lost on them. Never before has there been a single united demi-human alliance of this sort. Past invasions were of isolated tribes, and those were hard enough for the Holy Kingdom to fend off. A single united kingdom? Naya pondered what that would mean for the Roble Holy Kingdom if such a force invaded. It was difficult to imagine that the land would survive such an invasion. "I wouldn't want to be on that side of the wall if it happened." She suppressed a shudder and rubbed the side of her head where the small horns of bone were just beginning to emerge, each inch a reminder of her lost humanity. But it mattered less and less to Naya as the days passed by and her city continued to grow. The brutal display of contempt for non-human life was a warning to her in particular, or so it felt. That was what concerned the Queen of Frost. They must have worked out what's happening here, though I can't imagine how. No, some kind of magic would account for it. I still need to establish a court system and rule of law that isn't dependent only on strength, and to do that I need a firmer unity than I have right now. She turned her eyes away from all the construction and toward the distant wall. It was such a large and imposing structure that its mere existence discouraged most demi-humans from invading the Holy Kingdom. Having seen it up close from the other side, she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, that is the point. As long as it stands, it's a mark of human supremacy, domination, and security. It is there to tell us we can do what we want, and you can't beat us. More importantly, it was the truth. Nia folded her hands behind her back. Thalrin just looked at her, waiting for judgment. The wall has fallen before, but back then, it didn't have the fortress city there to support it. If we prepare properly, with a little help, we can take it. With luck, that will give us a position of strength to bargain from. You would kill humans? Thalrin asked rhetorically. Humans tried to kill me first. Twice. Nia pointed out, and if they got a chance, other than my parents, Nia put a hand on the green armor over her chest, they would definitely try again. I'm not a human anymore, and not a squire anymore, now. I'm the Frost Queen, mistress of the kingdom of Demalbion. My duty is to that, not to them. She answered her first follower. Then what do we do, my queen? The orc chief asked. Call the dark dwarf foreman to me, tell him I need to see him about some siege equipment, and summon the chief of the Bladers. I need to know how he feels about night battles. And the Terrapus chief, I need to know how much their strongest flyers can carry. Nia gave the order and he pounded his chest twice with a mailed fist. Yes, my queen. He grunted. We'll have to teach them a harsh lesson about the value of life, but when it is over, we should have both a kingdom of our own, in the truest sense of the word, and peace that no stupid paladin bitch will dare to breach, Nia said, more to herself than to anyone, and went to inspect another project. The atrocity was terrible, you have no idea. The Holy Queen let them execute every captured southern noble as well as her administrators and soldiers, Skarna whispered with hushed tones to the rapt tavern audience. They were the fourth one that day and the ninth one in the last two, and even without seeing them, Skarna knew beyond a doubt that the doppelgangers were busy spreading the word like wildfire elsewhere. Flames from candles licked the air and cast dancing shadows that made the green-eyed Skarna appear all the more fierce. Using every oratorical skill she acquired in telling stories, she relayed the word of the collapse of the northern government. From among the crowd of the upscale tavern, nobles and merchants listened with expressive eyes and open ears. Skarna's stomach didn't even rumble when she smelled the stew reaching its state of near perfection. The nobles, they defleshed, the officials, they lashed, I only barely made it out of there myself. Skarna touched her hand to her chest where the fine silk garment rested. The feel of the expensive scarlet cloth was such that she made the gesture purely for the pleasure of touching it again. With her hair neatly brushed and bound behind her, and her lips painted red and her cheeks touched with rouge, she appeared every inch the wealthy daughter of a well-to-do merchant. My friends and I hid in the sewers the whole time, sneaking out at night to grab food, and on the story went, the lurid pictures she painted of the brutal indifference of the Holy Queen to southern lives and the horrible deaths that met those who resided in Hobans were laid out to haunt the dreams of those who heard the green-eyed woman speak. When she was done, Skarna accepted a few free drinks, some sympathetic hugs from those who believed she was of their class. And then she made her exit. The door shut behind her and she ventured out into the night to rejoin the Lady Albedo. Ileana shouted into the dense forest, "Do not shoot. I am an elf." She heard nothing, her ears twitched, the foliage and trees were so thick and plentiful that there were no shadows to speak of, only the solid sea of night through which she moved. "Do not shoot. I am an elf." Still she heard nothing. "I am Ileana, once a whore of Wenmark. Please do not shoot me. I come with words of my savior," she announced again into the empty night and stepped forward. Despite a long life in the Dark City, she still remembered the art of the silent step, and not even several human lifetimes surrounded by stone could tear her away from her love of the deep woods, no matter what borders those woods lay within. Her feet fell noiselessly over leaves that should have crunched, she avoided branches that she should not have been able to avoid, only her occasional words shouted into the nothing would alert anyone to her coming. The signs of elven presence were clear to her piercing eyes even in the dark, invisible even in broad daylight to the clumsy humans that might have thought to pursue them into their own ground. So, forward she went, until a voice finally shouted back. "We see you. You are safe, come this way." It was a soft, but urgent and insistent voice. Ileana followed it until she found herself in the midst of a clearing. In the high branches, a number of elves sat clad in mixes of human peasant clothing and leaf-woven materials. A few wore animal skins and furs, such as wolves, bears, and others. They were well-fed, which was different from when they were in bondage, but they were also armed, which was a vast difference. Many were armed with bows, some with captured swords. Their faces were hard and often scarred over from the abuses suffered in mines or within the private hells of the ruined city. It was also noteworthy that those with bows had them drawn and arrows aimed at Ileana. She kept her hands up and slowly sank to both her knees. "I am one of you. I swear," she cried out. "Then explain your clothing?" An elf atop a branch said and hopped down. He landed on one light foot and approached. He was towering, broad-bodied and thickly muscled. Even at a glance it was obvious he was one of the Elf King's get. Not that the bastard would have cared about the fate of his son. He pointed a finger down at her. "You're dressed in fine clothing, like one of the collaborating house whores that would see one of us lashed for the reward of a honey cake. You're well fed, and I haven't seen you. Any elf that isn't with us by now should have been dead a long time ago." Ileana looked up the length of his arm and held his gaze with her own. "I was a whore, one of the slaves bound to serve at the Golden Roan in the wealthy district of the city. I am dressed this way," she touched the black and white garment, "because I serve someone else, the one to send me to you. She's not a human, but a demon, and more importantly, she is the demon who destroyed Wenmark." Voices buzzed at that. A meteor shower did that, and an earthquake. He began to say, but stopped when he saw Ileana stare at him like he was an idiot. "I was with the demon when she did it. She used her master's scroll and some power of her own to destroy the city. I gave her my soul in exchange, my life, my everything. And now she sends me to you. Or are you so great a fool you believe that the quake and the meteors came together by chance?" Ileana hurled the contemptuous denial at him like a rock, and he grew quiet. "Say we believe you. Why are you here now?" he demanded. "Chaos is about to consume the Holy Kingdom. My mistress is offering you a choice. There is very little chance that you can form an elven homeland in the forests here. Even if you could, there is no way it could last, but there is a place you'll be able to go, and soon, if you're willing to work with others who are not elves." Ileana promised, and seeing the bows slowly lower and the tension in the strings go lax, she lowered her hands and began to breathe normally again. "What would we have to do? To get land for ourselves?" he asked with a tightly furrowed brow. "Kill humans," Ileana said with a gleeful smile. It was matched by the others of her race almost immediately. Volume 5 C43. Revenge is as common as fire in war. When the peasants on the wall tormented and executed the captive nobles and officials en masse and tossed them dead or screaming to their deaths down off of the wall, the soldiers of the royal army were incensed beyond reason. The very next morning before the break of dawn, a general assault on the whole city took place. The magic casters shot balls of flame or strikes of lightning at the defenders. The onagers hit walls and towers and fired indiscriminately. The crashing noise and thunderous echo of destruction covered the screams of the dying, and smothered even the roar of battle mania from the massed army of the Holy Queen. A ram with 20 soldiers was crushed by heavy rocks brought up just for that purpose, only for soldiers on tall ladders to take the position. The spray of blood and the toppling of severed limbs rendered the act futile when a gatehouse fell and the groaning chain of the portcullis coming up allowed the infantry and cavalry alike to charge into the breach. The leaders of the mob rallied their resistance again and again, only for the heavily armored knights to charge into the massed ranks with lowered lances and skewer several like shish kebabs on the wooden stakes and to shatter the limbs of those who were too close to the flanks of the heavy armored horses. Butchery followed, and through it walked the Holy Queen. She followed her soldiers on foot under the shields and security of the commander of the Royal Guard, Gotsahadin, his soldiers, and Kelet Custodio. The bodies of the dead required her to step over those in her path, but bit by bit, block by block, she drew ever closer to her palace. Here and there a knot of people surrendered and were bound by knights, but her orders on the whole were followed. Sword-bearing peasants or those who carried the plunder of fallen soldiers from before, were executed out of hand. The once loving eyes of the queen were turned to ice, and as an inexorable force of nature, her army rolled forward, capturing one building, one block and one square intersection at a time. Until at last, she reached the palace, and before her eyes, Gustave Montagnier charged into the doors as soon as they splintered open. The smell of feces, innards and blood was thick on the once white stones of the pavilion before the palace, but the memory of the torturous ends the mob subjected her followers to kept the sickness of the slaughter at bay. I was only velvet before. Now I must be an iron fist in a velvet glove. I can never allow this to happen again. I can still love my country, but it must learn never to rebel against me again. Even days later, that thought lingered at the back of her mind, as did her recollection of sitting on her throne again and looking out at the last corpses of those who fell trying to keep her from her rightful place. Now, weeks later, the peasants watched something else take place. The city's population was dramatically depleted, but to ease resentment and deflect blame, both from herself and the survivors, she laid it at the feet of the corrupt officials. Standing on the dais before people she was still sure must have been with the mob at least in name for a time, she looked down where the nooses swayed back and forth and shivering officials gibbered mindless protests. The crimes against the royal family were great, but would not have taken place were it not for the corrupting influences of those who forgot that they served me and that they served you. Therefore all common folk currently held on charges of treason are pardoned, and the true guilty will now be punished. Kalka called out to the crowd, which stood stunned as the captives held in the dungeon awaiting execution were brought out, had their fetters removed, and simply walked away free. But before they could cheer, she leveled a hand down from on high at the former officials, including minor nobles. For the crime of accepting bribes for the judgment of cases, you are sentenced to be hanged. For the crime of extortion for protection, you are sentenced to be hanged. For the crime of treason against the crown by way of the abuse of your office, you are sentenced to be hanged. For the crime of the death sentence pronouncements went on as gibbering officials were marched up to the scaffold, had the nooses put around their necks, and then were kicked off the little stools on which they stood a moment later. Necks snapped, bodies swayed, and one by one, 2 by 2, 8 by 8, the purges continued. Only when, in the Queen's judgment, every official in the capital was either cleared or hanged, did she call her remaining council together into a private office. She folded her hands together on top of the smooth polished dark wooden table as Kellett, Gotzer, Remedios, and Gustave shifted with discomfort in their seats. Her smile was seemingly sweet, small, and polite. But a hard edge lay beneath, evident by the tension in her hands. The corruption that crippled the capital is removed, new officials are being trained from the survivors, and things are improving. The Queen said, but her ice-filled eyes did not show any sense of relief. But the reality is that our nobles failed us severely. The southern nobles failed to provide both the aid and the taxes we needed, and this poses a serious threat to everyone and everything. The corruption of our officials includes our nobles. Therefore I intend to send out an order for every noble household head or firstborn son to present themselves here in Hobens along with 7 years of financial accounting from their estates. Any failure to appear will be considered treason. Am I clear? The Queen said it with the quiet calm of resolve that was more common among veteran warriors, and it left the table briefly struck dumb. My Queen, Remedios began. Good, no questions. Queen Kalka cut Remedios off without mercy. Keep the army ready. If the South rises, we will have to go and deal with them. Every failing noble will be utterly purged, every disloyal element, purged. The nobility of North and South failed the kingdom completely, and that failure reached its tendrils all the way to this very table. Queen Kalka pressed her forefinger against the wooden surface, pointing down at it and glaring at her assembled council. What lies ahead will not be easy, but it will be a renewal of our kingdom when it is over. You are now dismissed. Prepare your armies and officers for fighting. I intend to end this quickly, at any cost. The Queen said and stood up, inviting no further words from any of them. They rose, one and all, mute, humbled, hopeful, horrified, all at the same time. They swallowed involuntarily, and bowed to her as she made to leave. My Queen, they said as one, holding the bow until she left them behind.